Hello and welcome to another episode of The Living Philosophy. In today's episode I want to talk about an important distinction in the myth of Eden. So I want to do a little reading from the book of Genesis and just talk about how the story about women that's given in the book of Genesis isn't actually, the popular account isn't necessarily accurate and could be based on a certain mistranslation, and how that can change the entire aspect of the entire Genesis account at the start. So yeah, let's dive in and explore that myth, the Genesis myth, and the story that occurs when God creates man. And so the traditional story is that God creates Adam, and then out of Adam he takes a rib out of Adam, and that makes Eve. But there's actually two accounts of the creation of humanity in the first two chapters of Genesis, and I think they're quite interesting because you could have some different interpretations going on here. So let's have a look at the first account. So this is in chapter 1 of Genesis, and so it says, "So God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." So there's no whisper of a rib there. There's no sense that they were separate. He created them together and at the same point and out of the same materials, we assume. But in the second chapter of Genesis there's a slightly different account. And this is where the popular version of the myth that women came from Adam's rib comes from. And interestingly, a lot of people, like literalists, actually, because I've done research on this story, and people were actually a lot of people thought that men had one more rib than women, which is it's kind of bizarre, but I guess you wouldn't really think about it much. I mean, how I've never counted my ribs, and I've never counted any women's ribs, so I guess I don't have the scientific thing to back it up. But I guess it's interesting how that gets into your mind and how when you take a myth so literally. But anyway, let's have a look at the second account of it in chapter 2 of Genesis. So there's something blah blah, God creates the world and all that. "The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, ruach, spirit. And the man became a living being." And then it goes on to say blah blah, he creates the garden, puts him in the garden, creates these other things, tries to get helpers for man with the animals, but it doesn't work. And so, "But for Adam no suitable helper was found, so the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. And yeah, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame." So that's interesting. No denying that. What is particularly fascinating is if you dig into the word there for rib, and we've taken that translation for granted in the cultural passing on of the story, but actually that word for rib, I think that's the only time it's translated as rib in the entirety of the Old Testament, and that's the only one that's written in Hebrew. So the other times it's translated as the sides, so it's like the sides of the tabernacle use that same word that's used there for rib. So perhaps a better rendition, and there's some debate about this, but there is one of the main camps would say that actually a better way of reading that is as the side of Adam. So God takes the side of Adam, and that brings to mind a myth from Plato. So in Plato's, what's that one called, the Symposium, it's a group of playwrights, and Socrates is there, and I think Xenophon is there as well, and they're all just having a big feast, and then they get talking about love, and each of them gives a speech on what they think love is, and the playwright, the famous comedic playwright Aristophanes, who actually, according to Nietzsche, Plato, underneath his pillow when he died, was found a copy of one of Aristophanes' books, one of his plays, which is quite interesting that the greatest philosopher would have a comedian under his pillow. But anyway, Aristophanes in the Symposium, he gives a speech, and in this speech he says that love comes from the fact that man was once a conjoined being, two beings conjoined in one, but Zeus feared their power, and so he divided them. And so love is the man always craving to be whole again, to be rejoined with his love. And that is what we are looking for in love. We're looking to become whole again because we're missing that part of ourselves. And it's a very interesting idea if you take it from here, the second version in Genesis, that you've got Adam and you've got Eve and they were conjoined in one, but that they've become separate and God takes the rib out. I think it's an interesting way of reading Genesis, and perhaps that would have changed the myths, because that doesn't put woman as a mere rib of man in her creation. So that would mean that neither of the two stories of Genesis see women as inferior to men, but that the woman is the other half of man. There's that together they are complete, together they are one unit, and this is the love that is wired into us, the attachment that bonds us together as couples. And so that's an interesting, different way, I think, of reading that myth, and a way that puts women on a much more even level with man. So rather than the rib, it's the side. Yeah, so we can connect it with that Platonic version of the myth, and we can see that perhaps we were conjoined. This is a story not about woman as the servant or the inferior, merely the rib of man, but as the thing that completes. We complete each other. And I think even the word for man in this thing of Genesis is, again, it applies to humanity rather than to man as an individual. And so yeah, I just think it's an interesting way of reading Genesis. It's certainly changed the way I look at that initial story and the implications of the symbolism going forward. I'd like to do more videos on exploring the story of Genesis and the symbolism in Genesis, and so I'll link those here. And yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe if you haven't already. Give the video a like, a thumbs up, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you have any insight, any feedback, or any other things you'd like to add to that account. And otherwise, I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.